Friends, allies, and Americans, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast, where we tell the stories of folks who defend your children's rights by advocating for inclusive public school systems and who fight for diversity across our nation. I'm your host, Karen Swoboda. Let's get into it. And on today's podcast, I am so honored and appreciative and thankful for Anna Eskamani, not only for joining our podcast today, but for being one of the first people to sign our pledge to protect our public schools. Anna is a representative in Florida. Anna, you are doing incredible work down there, against incredible odds. So welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I love talking to you. I love hearing about all the things that you've got going on. So tell me, or tell our audience rather, what you are doing in Florida as a Floridian representative.
Oh, Florida. I'm just here to let folks know that we're not just Florida man. You know, you have a lot of diversity and a lot of folks who are doing great work on the ground against very, very difficult environment. And just to provide some quick context, I was first elected in 2018 to the state legislature, but I'm born and raised in Orlando. I'm a daughter of working class immigrants. My parents came to this country in search of the American dream and sacrificed so much for me to be able to even have the opportunity to run for office and be in this place of service. And so I never take any of that for granted. I went to public schools, so part of my signing of the pledge is just my own lived experiences of public education, which I'm happy to dive deeper into, but I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for my public schools, my teachers, my counselors who helped keep me on track when I went through some really difficult experiences as a kid. And with that said, when I decided to run for office for the first time, I knew that defending public education was going to be a priority for me because Florida has been on this track of just privatizing education, of diverting public funds to for-profit, unaccountable private schools. And in that process, demonizing educators, attacking unions, banning books, whitewashing, and just erasing history. And so I knew that all of this would be important to me. And not just in the K-12 space, but also higher ed. So I'm a proud graduate of the University of Central Florida. I also just completed my PhD in public administration at UCF. And so I really do value the role that public education plays in building a strong democracy and engaged civil society. Because at the end of the day, public education is the ultimate equalizer. And so when I defend public education, when we fight for funding for teachers, when we ensure that we have better student to counselor ratios, when we are looking at food in the classroom, so our kids have food in their belly, right, and don't go home hungry. When we think about just the importance of our students with special needs and meeting and ensuring that they're well supported, all of these issues, at the end of the day, ties back to an equalizer. It ties back to ensuring that every person can truly reach their potential. And when you attack public education, you are attacking each one of those students and their ability to achieve that type of collective and self-efficacy.
That is, and I want to talk to you specifically. First of all, I love, and I've heard it before, but I love the statement that public education is the great equalizer.
Yeah.
Since you were in a state that to me was at the forefront of this whole issue with the birth of Moms for Liberty. I mean, this is really, where it came on the scene. Let's start with this. Can you explain why the privatization of public education is a threat to democracy?
Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many facets to this question. I think what's really important is to remember how foundational public education is just to our country and our country's history. And the fights that we've had in our history to ensure that public education, that high quality public education is available to every child. I mean, here in Florida, it is in our state constitution that every child has access to a high quality education. Like, it's so prioritized that our state constitution enumerates that. But when I think about an engaged citizen, and I think about the ability to problem solve, to critically think, to question statements made by pundits and politicians. I mean, all that comes down to your educational knowledge and your mental capacity to do so. And if you don't have the opportunity to learn those skills, not only are you at a disadvantage, but it is a threat to the health of our democracy. Because then, unfortunately, it creates an echo chamber where folks can be vulnerable to insidious tactics that are designed to divide us versus solve problems and bring us together. One of the biggest points I really stress in my advocacy is that every culture war is really a class war. So what do I mean by that? Obviously, when we turn on the news or we go on social media, some of the most um, polarizing and just talked about, right? Some of the most controversial topics intersect with these so-called culture war battles. And whether it's about the Don't Say Gay Trans bill in Florida, whether it's focused on stories of history and Black history, and in case of Florida, our state government wants to rewrite history to say that enslaved people benefited from slavery. So when we have these policy fights, they often get branded as culture wars. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that they are dividing cultures by doing this. They are trying to further divisions between different demographics of voters. But at the same time, the end game really is to destroy public education, to push teachers out, to force parents out. And when you have universal vouchers, there are parents who are like, well, if my public school is going to, ban books, I'm going to take my kid out and take the money and go somewhere else. So it really is also a way to push parents to choose different options as well. When you degrade and defund public education, you can't blame parents who, want to find a better option for their child. But the intent of that is to essentially further the divide between the have and have not. Because what ends up taking place is that for kids who can't afford high quality private schools, they're going to continue to learn about these issues. They're going to have access to critical thinking skills to build and so forth. But the kids like me who are not going to have those resources, where public education will be their only option, it's going to be incredibly low quality. It's going to have textbooks that are eliminating important concepts like climate change that not only are happening around us, but make us more competitive at a global scale. And it basically doesn't build leaders anymore. You're not going to build leaders. You're just going to build folks who are going to do, what pundits and politicians tell them to do. And I think that's so dangerous to the health of our democracy, because a democracy only works when we all participate. But you can participate at a more engaged level when you have information, and if you know where to find information and to process information, which at the end of the day is fundamental to going to school, is learning those skills. So I worry about this long-term effect that when you destroy public education, when you divide our communities and distract us through culture wars, what ends up happening is that you have an erosion of high quality access to be that equalizer. So you further the divide between the haves and have nots. You create a societal structure where only people with money are in charge and everyone else is suffering. And I just refuse for that to become our reality.
Let me ask you about specifics. What has, first of all, if you were to narrow it down to a time frame, like how many years ago, and I know it started long before, but in recent history, how have things escalated in Florida? And give me some examples of what you're seeing down in your schools.
Well, the important dynamic here is that it's been happening for a long time. So, obviously folks are really paying attention now for clear reasons. But the erosion of public education in Florida started way before Ron DeSantis, and even way before Rick Scott. So when Jeb Bush was governor, that is when you started to see the push towards privatization. And Jeb Bush is, obviously part of the Bush family and, well-known Republican. I do think that when folks look at today's Republicans, they look at the past more fondly because they weren't as extreme. But on public education and just the erosion of these institutions, that was a goal of
Yeah.
Governor Jeb Bush. So he leads a school voucher foundation to this day. So that continues to be an
So
arena, a focus for him.
why? Why is that something that they're pushing?
A few reasons. I mean, I do think that ideologically speaking, I'm sure there's, for some, it's ideological. For some, they
Mhm.
really do believe that, this delivers a better educational experience, that this meets kids where they're at. I think there's also just this, there is like this underlying I economic argument that some make around, well, the money is associated with the child, so should go with the child where the child goes. And I think there are some folks who despite the holes you can poke in those arguments, I think there are folks who really
Yeah.
do believe in that. But there's also this overarching motive of profit, because
That's
when
what I'm
you
asking. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't think you could ignore that.
Right.
Public schools are not here to make money. They're a public good. But when you shift public money to the private sector, there is this profit motive. And not only is money made, and a lot of money is made, but it also becomes political contributions. And so politicians who support the privatization receive thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars in political contributions um, from groups like Charters USA, from Step Up
Well,
for Students. I mean, they have employees that give huge checks to different political candidates and whatnot. And then, of course, Florida also has the corporate tax credit program. So corporations can make donations to a corporate tax credit program, and those dollars go to the privatization of public education, and they can offset what they would pay in corporate taxes to the state.
okay.
So instead of Walmart, for example, paying what they owe in taxation, where that goes in general revenue, and those dollars can be allocated towards where the need is. If they donate to Step Up for Students instead, they get a write off. So that money goes straight to the voucher system. The state coffers never see it. So the corporation not only benefits themselves from doing that, but then they can, continue to cater favor to lawmakers
Mhm.
who want them to do that. So there really is like this political cycle involved too of influence. I can't tell you the number of times large corporations, when they're debating a regulatory bill that impacts them, they'll have their lobbyists testify in committee and say, well, we're such good shepherds, good stewards. We donate this much stuff for students every year. It's like they kind of, dangle that a little bit too in trying to get what they want on their regulatory goals for their
Right.
whatever their business model is. And so there is this huge profit margin as well. You have companies that are buying out schools that close and opening up private schools. You have schools that are just
Can you
popping
give
up
me
in churches.
can you can you give me an example of that?
Sure. I mean, well, actually, it's so interesting because it kind of goes both ways. Because you also have situations
Mhm.
where, when a private school fails, right, and then another company, takes that property, and there's like
Yes.
lines of connection. Like, I mean, a lot of these companies also have real estate arms, like Charters USA. They have at least three different kind of corporate entities, right? So they have the actual charter school like operations. They have like a software company that builds the software the school uses.
But
And then
this is all something that I don't think it's as well known as the real estate aspect of
correct,
what happens with these charter schools. So sorry, I
correct.
didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
but
no, you're
yeah.
totally fine. I mean, the other Charge USA also runs like a real estate company, basically, right? Like, I mean, and there's a lot of money to be made in property, especially in a state like
Yeah.
Florida that's growing so fast. So, I mean, that's absolutely a part of it too, is like scoping out, for these types of uh, real estate deals that,
Right.
again, also just to benefit those that are part of this scheme. I also think it's
So
important to note that you have many politicians who have families that own private schools that receive public money. And so there's also these lines of influence even within the legislature.
I want to get into several things. I want to talk about um, how this will affect children with special needs, children with disabilities, children with
Right.
IEPs. But before I get into that, I always go at about the halfway point in the show and I do a volunteer shout out. And I have a very special volunteer who I want to recognize today. Her name is Sydney Grote. And Sydney is from Florida. She's one of Defense of Democracy's volunteers. And Anna, I think that you will enjoy this part of it. She actually started as a Defense of Democracy volunteer, and she is now running for school board.
Oh,
So this is
how fabulous is that? That's great.
yeah. Yeah, so Sydney, I'm just super proud of you, and I appreciate all the work you've done for Defense of Democracy, and I know you will be just a wonderful representative. So congratulations and thank you, Sydney, for all you've done. So now going back to us,
Awesome.
Anna.
Thanks, Sydney.
Yeah, let's talk about children with disabilities and IEPs and the difference between public education and those requirements and what the charter schools are required to do or not required to do.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, right? So if you're a public school, then you have many regulations to follow. That also includes, by the way, on just building safety. So when you build a school, there are so many requirements that you have to meet with the Florida Building Code. And a part of that is because these schools have to be sound and strong. They serve as our shelters as well during hurricanes and so forth. And there's expenses involved in that, just capital expenses involved in that. When you operate a charter or a private school, you don't have to follow even the building code. You can have a lot of
That I did not know.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing too, right? Is like there's all these kind of minutia, somewhat bureaucratic dynamics here, but yeah, like if you're gonna it's easier for someone to pop up all these private schools than it is for a district to build schools. When a district builds schools, they also have to look at growth patterns. They have to, there's push and pull in making those decisions. You need community feedback, and so of course it's going to be more expensive for them because they have more standards to meet too.
Yes.
But with that said, so on the infrastructure side, there's differences on policy, regulations, and requirements. Same thing when it comes to the student needs. So by no means do private schools have to follow IEPs. I mean, there's no requirement to do any type of programming or specialties or anything to meet a child who has an intellectual disability or any type of disability. There's no requirement whatsoever. And if anything, they can reject students. They can say, we don't want to accept those students. And that's so discriminatory. So they can basically, these are students with public money. So they have a voucher of public money, $8,000 some dollars, and that school can say, well, we don't serve your kind here. And they could do the same thing to students with disabilities, alongside any disability, alongside LGBTQ plus students, and even on cultural basis. I mean, the discriminatory reports regarding hairstyles in Florida voucher schools is very underreported, but there have been schools who have dismissed students because they're wearing their hair in braids or wearing their hair in a way where the school itself doesn't find it to be appropriate, even though it's culturally relevant to that student. So there's just no accountability. And they can also terminate educators for being gay. That has happened many times in Florida. A teacher is spotted at attending a pride event or something, and they lose their job. That happened in Brevard County, next door to Orange, and at a private school. And so the options to rectify that are close to none. And those are all common experiences. Very common.
And we have and the other thing, and I want every parent listening to this, because to me this was the light bulb where I was like, okay, now this is really real, is if you have a child with an IEP or any issues within a charter school, if you're in any of us who have gone to bat for their kids, within a school system, you understand that you have rights. You have certain rights as a parent, and your child has certain rights that is guaranteed by the government, that you can go, and if those rights are not being met, you have an avenue to pursue. Whereas in a charter school, it is entirely private. They can make any decisions they want, and they do not. And this is like, I really wish this would click with people, but in a public school, you are required to hire someone who has a background and a degree and has gone to school to be a teacher and knows what they're talking about. In a private school, you don't have any of that. You can literally hire someone who has no background, no nothing, and give them a textbook and say, you are suddenly now a history or science teacher.
Yeah. No certification required at all. And I
No.
think it's so misleading because a lot of families don't know that, to your point. And they just assume that if my child goes to school with a uniform on, it's a high quality school. And that's clearly not the case, right? Like, clearly not the case. And so there has to be a lot more education so that families can also make informed decisions and realize that this school does not have to have certified teachers. This school does not even have to meet school safety standards when it comes to their
Right.
buildings or gun violence prevention. This school does not have to meet any disability requirements. And I think once parents kind of see that, there have been situations, of course, where parents will bring their child to a private school and then realize they're not getting the support they need, and then they pull them out and bring them to a public school, and the money does not follow that child. So that's really
Yes.
frustrating too, because when that
Mhm.
happens, it's the school's responsibility to support that child, even if the per pupil spending doesn't travel with the child.
Right. Absolutely. So I always like to end the show on like a positive note. So I would love to hear from you, what you are looking forward to, and it can be something personal or it could be something professional, but what do you have on the horizon for you in the next, toward the end of this summer and into the
Oh
school
my
year?
goodness. Well, I'll tell you one thing that I just did, which I'm really really proud of, is I just finished my PhD at UCF. I mentioned earlier,
Oh,
so that took me
congratulations.
8 years to do,
Wow.
and so I'm just really 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 grateful that I had so many amazing teachers and mentors along the way,
Hmm.
that supported me to make sure that I would actually finish this program. It took me a really long time to finish, because I didn't think I was going to run for office. Well, I was in the program. I started before I ran for office, and then navigated being a PhD student and having a day job and being a lawmaker. And then COVID happened. So I shifted everything in my life to COVID response. So it was a very difficult journey, but I'm really grateful that I finished. And, I just walked the commencement stage on Saturday. So now my main goal is to win my reelection. So we're back on the campaign trail. It's my last campaign for the state legislature, as we have term limits in Florida. And so that's where a lot of my energy goes right now too, is just, helping to inspire people to get out to vote and get reelected and continue in my last 2 years in the legislature.
Well, I am, again, I'm so grateful that you joined today. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that you also have signed the Defense of Democracy Pledge to Protect Our Public Schools, which we have people, candidates and elected officials from all over the country, just like yourself, making the promise that if they are elected, that they will protect the public schools from attacks by extremist groups. It's such an obvious thing and a no-brainer to sign that, but it becomes
Absolutely.
such a political trigger point these days. It's amazing to me. So that did take a certain amount of courage. I congratulate you on finishing your degree. I'm sure that was hard earned, and I look forward to hearing lots more exciting stuff that you're involved in coming down the road.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And thanks for everything you do, and more good things to come for sure.